At 17:30 GMT, welcome to BizAfrica. Let's start with a report released by the World Bank recently, which indicated that Africa will be home to the majority of the world's poorest people in the next 17 years if current economic trends do continue. Now, even though the continent has had fairly strong and above-average GDP growth over the last decade, that has had virtually no effect really on aggregate inequality or poverty. Both metrics, according to the report, are still at highly unacceptable levels. CCTV's Sumitra Naidu explains why Africa's surge in GDP growth simply hasn't produced the jobs that the continent's economies so desperately need.
Africa has been recording growth rates of over 5% in the last decade and is poised for further economic growth. But the strong growth is not translating into enough jobs and is keeping Africans stuck in poverty. And it's not just the World Bank that is highlighting this worrying trend. The 2013 Afro Barometer, a recently released report based on a research project that measures public attitudes on economic, political and social matters in sub-Saharan Africa, found that 1 in 5 Africans still suffer from frequent shortages of food, water, medical care and cash. The World Bank has echoed the same sentiment, noting the pace of poverty reduction is unacceptably slow.
And one of the great challenges that Africa faces, and just like developing countries elsewhere, is matching job creation with high rates of growth. In fact, Africa's job creating levels have been very low, in fact almost just flatlined during this decade of growth.
Africa has improved on a number of fronts. Over 50 years of independence, regular democratic elections and strong economic growth. But corruption, poor governance and failed leaderships are widening the gap between rich and poor.
Governance and good leadership is critical. It shows what happens when you have poor governance and poor leadership in places like, let's say, Zimbabwe, for example, how quickly countries can go down, or in the Congo. So while some people have got tremendously rich during this process of growth, of course, others have simply stayed behind. And you see it in a place of a country like Mozambique, for example, 20 years of consistent plus 10% growth since the war ended in the early 1990s, yet more than half the country today still remains locked in poverty.
Even South Africa, the continent's economic powerhouse, has failed to reduce poverty levels despite a strong multi-party democracy, while Mauritius again came up tops for making a difference.
I think the lesson you take from Mauritius is you use whatever resources you have very well. So they had great location in the Indian Ocean. They had a sugarcane industry there beforehand. The combination of tourism and sugarcane got translated into other business sectors, and notably into the financial management area.
Now, many would argue that Mauritius is a much smaller country than South Africa, but many analysts believe that size doesn't matter when it comes down to poverty reduction. Good policy and effective leadership are more important and are ultimately the key change factors Africa desperately needs right now. Sumitra Naidu, CCTV, Johannesburg.
Let's head over now to Johannesburg, where CCTV's Sumitra Naidu is standing by with some more reactions and analysis on that particular story. Sumitra, what was the reaction to the Afro Barometer report's assertion that really government statistics on growth are telling only part of the story, but not all of it?
Well, Rama, obviously very disappointing, but we've seen little reaction from African leaders on this latest survey. No surprise, though, because African leaders are the ones that are being pinpointed in this report or for not doing enough to help reduce poverty levels, or at least that's what analysts say is the biggest problem here. What was really concerning in the survey was that there was so little improvement. So analysts are saying that it's going to take a very long time to eradicate poverty. But when you look at the numbers, poverty reduction is actually not even happening in some countries. Instead, more people are falling into poverty. And this is even more concerning when you look at the strong growth the continent is recording. Some African countries have been recording 7% GDP growth, which should have translated into better economic conditions for poor people. But we're not seeing this. So it's now a case of a country is getting richer, but its people are getting poorer.
Indeed. Let's focus on the one key detail in that report. Afrobarometer uses a completely different way of measuring poverty across the countries which were surveyed. Why did it opt to use this approach?
That's right, Rama. The Barometer uses public opinion and public attitude to formulate its findings. So the difference here is that it is not using statistics, figures and calculations. It's really surveys, researchers going door to door to find out how people are living and what they are saying and thinking. And this was done in 34 countries across Africa, over 50,000 people surveyed. So these were people on the ground that really fed this research, and that's the findings. And this is why you get this huge disparity, because the economic data is showing strong economies and people on the ground are saying no, they're not seeing it.
Indeed. Finally, though, South Africa, one of the countries in the Afro Barometer report which actually had an increase in the amount of people who say they're living in poverty. What explains that trend?
That's right. This was a huge disappointment. Up until 2011, South Africa was still recording strong growth. And of course, being the economic heavyweight in Africa, it was a surprise for many that poverty actually increased. It was a slight increase from 0.71 to 0.81, but analysts say this trend is worrying, as there should have been no increase at all and rather some reduction. South Africa is struggling with a weak economy. Unemployment is still very high at 26%. There's been ongoing labor strife in the country, which has placed some pressure on foreign direct investment. Leadership in the country is under enormous pressure to implement better policy to improve job creation. And this is what analysts are saying. This is where the real issue lies. Employment reduces poverty. People need to earn a living and make the country attractive as well to investors. And this is key to affording people these opportunities.
Indeed. We'd love to leave it there. Thank you very much for that. That's CCTV's Sumitra Naidu live in Johannesburg with latest details and reactions, of course, to the story of Africa's jobless growth surge. Now, let's focus on South Africa. That country's Trade Minister Rob Davis and his French counterparts Nicole Brick have committed themselves to strengthening trade and investment ties between the two countries. Now, trade between South Africa and France has gone up by about 17% from a low of $2.3 billion in 2009 to around $2.7 billion in 2012. But that, keep in mind, is still well below pre-financial crisis levels of well over $3 billion in 2008. The ministers were addressing a business forum attended by almost 100 South African and French business leaders in Johannesburg.
We are also looking for partnerships that help us to build the infrastructure, both domestically and also, more importantly, regionally and across the continent. We have a basis in our existing relationships with France. We have French companies invested in our countries. We have French companies that are involved in our own domestic infrastructure program and French companies that are involved in the infrastructure programs in the rest of the African continent. But we believe that there is an opportunity for us to strengthen those relationships in a mutually beneficial and supportive way.
Elsewhere, a survey of business leaders from across Africa has found that the recurrent challenges of poor infrastructure, insufficient power and poor skills development still plague Africa's economies. Now that, however, comes even as confidence in growth does remain pretty high. The PricewaterhouseCoopers survey sampled about 300 CEOs from right across Africa, and it concluded that historical challenges associated with barriers to doing business on the continent are still very much alive. The CEOs were all in agreement that there is more need for much more intra-African trade. They observed that trade between African countries contributed to just 6 to 8% of the continent's total trade volumes, and that has been made even worse by existing regional trade blocs.
I think we have to develop trade blocks in a much more open way. I think one of the key things that we need to do is start looking at mobility of people and making that access of people around the continent a lot more easier. Because I think the visa requirements and tax regimes that exist within the African continent are just far too demanding to actually try and allow mobility to deal with. So if there's one issue that we need to deal with on the ground to actually make growth a reality and get the benefit of what we have on the growth opportunities on the African continent, it's going to be in that space of moving top-level skills around the continent.
Here's a question for you. Could Ghana's economic growth be at risk, partly due to the tightening of liquidity conditions in the global financial market? Well, obviously, of course, the answer to that question is quite different depending on who you ask. But the Institute of Statistical, Social and Economic Research in Ghana says the current uncertainty in global financial markets does make the country especially vulnerable to external shocks. CCTV's correspondent in Ghana sat down for a chat with Professor John Gatsi, an expert on the Ghanaian economy. He says even though the current situation may be cause for concern, he's still optimistic about Ghana's future.
Well, it is a fact that we are experiencing some problem with cash flow, but we will have also realized that our economy for the past 10 years have been growing steadily. In a growing economy, you will need infrastructure to support the continued growth and sustainability of the growth. As a result of that, we have many challenges to finance. Issues such as investing more in energy infrastructure, and investing more even in the distribution of power across the country. From 2010 up to 2012, there was a massive revolt by the working people of Ghana to demand better remuneration.
Ghana looks like one of the best destinations in West Africa for investors. Could you explain to us why Ghana is so attractive economically?
We have, over the years, strengthened the importance and the visibility of our governance institutions to the extent that we have different types of courts to deal with different commercial issues. So we believe that people are more confident to come and associate themselves with our business environment. And we have also taken time to develop our economy since 1992. By 2000, our economy is just around 15 billion, and we have been growing around 3%. But we have grown the economy to in excess of 70 billion Ghana cedis, and we have been able to keep our growth at a higher pace since then. We have opened our economy, we have liberalized our economy to the extent that anybody who is willing to obey the laws of Ghana can come and set up over here in accordance with the law and operate freely.
Time for a short break here on BizAfrica. Here's what's coming up next. Portugal's unemployed. They're flocking in huge numbers to Mozambique. Why exactly? We'll tell you when we come back.
BizAsia. Asia means business.
Make major investments in China.
Why we are living for?
That's a fundamental government
Position on China's by leaders.
I think that's frustration.
Political change and human rights. Don't you think human rights?
Dialogue. Ideas matter.
Welcome back. The Virunga Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo is home to a very unique combination of active volcanoes. You've got forests in there and savannas and some of the world's last mountain gorillas. But due to a nearly 2-decade-long conflict in that region, sectors like tourism really haven't had the time or the room to develop. Now the discovery of oil near the border with Virunga in DR Congo's more stable neighbour, Uganda, is sparking renewed interest in the area's economic potential. Conservation groups, however, aren't amused. They say the park should be left entirely alone. As CCTV's Peter Okaba now reports.
Created in 1925, the 27,000 km squared Virunga National Park is home to active volcanoes, forests, savanna and some of the world's last mountain gorillas. But tourism lodges here lie empty and none but the most adventurous travelers visit due to a nearly 2-decade-long conflict in the region which has left millions dead and great swaths of territory, much of it in the park itself, under rebel control. The UNESCO World Heritage Site is fast becoming an increasing focus for those seeking to exploit Central Africa's oil deposits.
There are major threats to the park. There's the situation of armed conflict. There are the pressures from different industries, including petrol.
The discovery of oil near the border with Virunga in Congo's most stable neighbor Uganda has prompted growing interest from Congolese authorities about the potential of blocks lying in what is known as the Albertine Graben along the country's eastern border. Last year, the authorities gave British company Soko International permission to begin aerial surveys within the so-called Block 5 around Lake Edward in the heart of the Virunga, a move that has sparked outrage amongst conservationists. But for long-suffering locals living in one of the most beautiful but one of the poorest places in the world, the presumed wealth generated by oil seems an attractive option.
For me, this seems like a really good opportunity because not only is that going to improve unemployment for the residents, but also it will improve the local economy. Why not even the economy of the country?
Nationally, the debate over Virunga has raised questions over how a country whose economy lies in ruins after decades of corruption and conflict can best profit from an area of outstanding natural beauty, but possibly also great mineral wealth. The granting of mineral prospecting rights and attempts to carry out seismic surveying in the park could put Soko and the government on a collision course with UNESCO, which prohibits such activities within its World Heritage Sites.
What are the consequences of oil exploration? The first consequence will be the effect it will have on the fisheries, which is the main resource that the communities around and inside the park depend on. The fisheries will be put in danger, especially due to the pollution that will surely be caused by oil exploration.
According to Soko, the company has established with the Congolese government that it would be acting legally to carry out exploration under Lake Edward. However, advocates for conservation quote a worldwide fund for nature commissioned study which has indicated that the park will contribute $48.9 million annually to the economy, climbing to $1.1 billion per year if a tourism sector can be established there. Peter Kaba, CCTV.
Now, the most common narrative in economic migration is one usually of Africans heading over to the West seeking better economic livelihoods. However, the economic malaise and the high unemployment rate in Europe have created the opposite trend. Many Portuguese, for example, are heading south to Mozambique as their home country grapples with quite the economic slowdown. CCTV's Julie Shire met up with some of the new immigrants in Maputo. She filed this report.
It is hard not to be tempted. The language is the same, the food is just as tasty, and Mozambique has today one of the world's fastest growing economies. Many Portuguese who were faced with mounting unemployment and rising taxes have decided to bet on Mozambique.
When I came here, I found a whole new world. This country is getting developed, and it's easier for people like me with skills to find corporate jobs. And then I fell in love with these capulanas, the local fabrics that all women wear. So I started my new business here. It's called Moz Designs and Garota Moz.
Mozambique is enjoying a boom after the discoveries of coal and gas reserves and is attracting highly skilled Portuguese like Vasco Gueifão.
I think Mozambique is a wonderful place to develop business and is the right bridge to do business with the Asian countries, like China, for example. I love this country. I think it's an astonishing country and full of opportunities.
Opportunities have been embraced, and Nuno Pestana, a Portuguese with Mozambican origins, has returned and invested $1.5 million in a restaurant business where he employs 110 people in the center of Maputo.
So many people came to Africa and Mozambique and thought we're gonna go to the tree and the money come. No, we're gonna work hard, work. And if you came to work, the business is good.
The Portuguese consulate in Maputo confirms that there are now 23,000 registered Portuguese who are working and investing in Mozambique.
Their work has important impact in development of the country. They are doing a lot of training. They are doing transfer of know-how, transfer of technology, and the majority of these companies are also have very important programs on corporate social responsibility.
Portuguese who are arriving now in Mozambique have come to escape Portugal's economic slowdown and lack of opportunity. They are highly skilled and they're looking for jobs that will give them stability and financial compensation for over the next 5 to 10 years. Many have come to invest in a country that is being reborn. Julie Shire, CCTV News in Maputo, Mozambique.
Right then, quick run through the markets. The start of the week has been a bit of a mixed bag, depending on which market you're talking about. Nigeria, for example, firmly in the green by the close of trade today, up by about 0.16. However, the story changes when you get down to South Africa. Lots of exposure, of course, to Western markets. It ended the day lower by 0.07%. Same story really in Nairobi. The 20-share index down by the exact same margin. The Egyptian market, however, in the green, up 0.93% on Monday trading. That's business for you today. Let's see you tomorrow. On to sport now with Beatrice.
Rama, many thanks indeed. The sport, your headline.